As you know, you cover diversity, equity, and inclusion. There was a big DEI push starting in 2020. But 2 years out, have you seen tangible growth in the workplace when it comes to DEI?
The answer is yes and no. Following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, many CEOs, executives, and other leaders in companies stepped up and made statements declaring that those murders were horrific, acknowledging the existence of systemic racism, and calling for more attention on diversity, equity, and inclusion broadly within their workplaces. That is praiseworthy, it's commendable, it was exciting at that time. But unfortunately, what we've seen over the past 2.5 years since that moment is a fizzling of that corporate enthusiasm, surely for systemic racism, but really for other aspects of DE&I. So on the one hand, yes, it got so much more attention in 2020, but really here now at the end of 2022, not so much.
So 2 years later, have these promises been made, and how can people keep them accountable?
Well, one way we can hold businesses accountable is calling for them to make good on the financial promises they made in the name of George Floyd. One of my Forbes pieces, is asking, where is the $200 billion with the B, that companies pledged in summer 2020? So many of those dollars remain uncommitted and therefore unspent, right? And many of the leaders who made those commitments, time bound them, right? It was, $1 billion over, the next 3 years, 4 years, or 5 years. Well, now we're 2.5 years in, and so many of those companies and the people who lead them have not spent the money. So that is, I think, the most pressing thing that that we need in terms of accountability. But even for organizations that did not make financial investments, many of them did make verbal promises, certainly to their Black employees, to their employees of color, and really to all of their other employees, their white employees too, that they were going to take DE&I much more seriously. So I do think that accountability means developing a strategy, not just having a one-time workshop on implicit bias or a one-time town hall on systemic racism, but really getting serious about embedding DE&I into every aspect of the business.
Let's talk about how can business leaders really, instead of these blanket statements, maybe a one-time workshop, embed this in their greater strategy?
Sure. We have to think about it in the ways that we think about other business functions and practices. For example, many companies rely so heavily on technology, not just for one function of the business, but really for just about everything that the business does, right? You have to think about the goodness and the reliability of those technological resources. Well, we have to think about DE&I in the same way. Imagine, for example, if you run a business and the Wi-Fi goes out or there's no internet access, right? That business is brought to its knees for the 10 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, half hour, whatever it is that there's no internet. We have to think about DE&I in that same way, right? Like, it's not just a thing that ought to, sit over here in the chief diversity officer's shop, but we have to think about it in the ways that we think about technology, for example, or the ways that we think about financial stability.